They say Charles Cullen was never able to look his victims' families in the eye. He confessed to 29 patient murders, but investigators estimate he was behind more than 400 over 16 years. A mental health professional must know his patient's past, his childhood, and his development as an adolescent. Remember that we are blank sheets of paper on which the experiences we've had are responsible for writing our history. Could it have been these experiences that led Cullen to become the Angel of Death? Join us to discover the truth behind the Angel of Death. Welcome to Mr. Terror 773. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications. Now, let's get started. Charles Cullen was born on February the 22nd, 1960, in Huron, New Jersey, to a working-class Catholic family, the eighth and last child in the family. His father, Edmund Cullen, a bus driver, was 56 years old when Charles was born, but died only 7 months later, leaving his son without a father, which caused him emotional and mental instability throughout his life. Cullen claimed to have had an unhappy childhood. In addition, his introverted personality made him the victim of constant abuse from his sister's boyfriends and classmates. At the age of 9, he stole some chemicals from school to take his own life, the first of 20 attempts over the years. But things can always take a turn for the worse, and that's what happened to him. His mother, Florence Cullen, died in a car accident in 1977 at the age of 60. Charles was a senior in high school at the time. He remembers his mother's death as a terrible experience and says he was very frustrated that the hospital didn't want to release his mother's body, which had been cremated without the family's permission. The following year, Charles wanted to leave his past and present lives behind, so he dropped out of high school and enlisted in the U.S. Navy. He served aboard the submarine USS Withdrawal Wilson, which was scheduled to remain submerged for more than 2 months. During this time, Cullen had to undergo rigorous physical tests, and several required psychological examinations, all of which he passed with flying colors. This is something to note and take into account to understand that despite suffering from disguised depression, he knew how to manage the symptoms that went unnoticed by the medical tests. After a few months, Cullen rose to the rank of Petty Officer Second Class as a member of the team in charge of the submarine's missiles. However, he was unable to adjust to the Navy due to his introverted personality. After a year of service, he became the target of hazing and humiliation by his shipmates. A petty officer saw him sitting in the missile control room wearing a surgical mask, latex gloves, and an apron, which shocked his superior due to such unusual behavior. Cullen was disciplined for this, but he never clearly explained why he was dressed that way. As a result, the Navy decided to reassign Cullen to a less responsible position on the ship. After this event, he attempted suicide again and was sent to the Navy psychiatric ward several times over the next few years, until he was finally medically discharged for reasons still unknown. Shortly thereafter, he enrolled in nursing school in New Jersey. He was elected president of his class for his diligence and outstanding grades as a student. He graduated in 1986 and began working in the burn unit at St. Barnabas Medical Center, where he would begin to write his own story. In 1988, as he would testify years later, Cullen committed his first murder at that hospital. He administered a drug to a patient under doctor's orders, but the dose was deliberately given as a lethal overdose for no reason and without knowledge of other professionals. He repeated this with other patients until in 1992, when Cullen left his job after facility authorities launched an investigation to determine the authority of some IV bags that had been contaminated. The investigation found that Cullen appeared to be responsible for the deaths of dozens of patients who died under unusual circumstances, although such acts were never reported to the legal authorities. At the time, Cullen was married to Adrienne Brown, with whom he had 2 daughters. His wife once stated that her husband's behavior was very strange and disturbing. While he was not violent with her, he was violent with his pets, whom he constantly and senselessly subdued. After the incident at St. Barnabas Medical Center, Cullen got a job at Warren Hospital in Philadelphia, where he would murder 3 elderly ladies with overdoses of the cardiovascular drug digoxin. The last of these victims claimed that a suspicious nurse had entered her room while she slept that night to administer a drug, but family members and hospital staff dismissed the allegation as lacking credibility. The following year, Cullen moved into a basement apartment after divorcing his wife, with whom he shared custody of their daughters. He told those close to him that he was considering leaving the profession, but was forced to continue because the judge had ordered him to pay child support for his daughters. That same year, in 1993, Cullen broke into a colleague's home while she and her son were asleep, but with no apparent intent. His ex-wife also filed a police report, alleging that her ex-husband was harassing her. As a result, Cullen was convicted of breaking into his ex-wife's home and sentenced to 1 year of probation. The day after his arrest, Charles attempted suicide again. He took 2 months off work and was treated for depression at 2 psychiatric facilities, but made 2 more suicide attempts later that year. Nevertheless, Cullen was able to return to work several months later. A 91-year-old oncology patient reported that Cullen, who was not her assigned nurse, entered her room and injected her with a drug. The woman died the next day, and her son reported that her death was unnatural. The hospital investigated Cullen and several other nurses, but found nothing against them and even less against Cullen. So he continued to work at the hospital until the following spring. And so the years went by, and Cullen was either fired or simply resigned from the next 6 hospitals he worked at. 15 years had passed between his first murder and the next and last hospital where he was employed. Despite his history of mental instability and the number of deaths he left in his wake at various hospitals, Cullen had no problem finding work due to the shortage of nurses in the country at that time. Additionally, there was no mechanism in place to identify nurses with mental or professional problems as there is today, and hospitals feared losing credibility, so they refused to take significant legal action against Cullen. In September 2002, Cullen began work at the last hospital where this story would unfold, Somerset Hospital in New Jersey. Soon after he arrived, the facility began to notice Cullen's strange behavior. The hospital's surveillance systems showed that he was accessing the medical records of patients not assigned to him, and his colleagues began to see him going in and out of patients' rooms that did not belong to him. The computer system he used to dispense medications to patients showed that Cullen was requesting unprescribed medications from his direct patients. The nurses' requests were bizarre, to say the least. Many appeared to be cancelled immediately after they were made, and some were repeated within minutes of each other. In July 2003, the executive director of the state's Drug Poisoning Information and Education System warned hospital officials that at least 4 suspicious overdoses indicated that one of their employees might be killing patients. Although they occasionally suspected Cullen of his odd behavior, they never found any direct evidence to implicate him. At the time, Cullen had a special friendship with his co-worker, Amy Lauren, who was also an ICU nurse. Amy always spoke highly of her colleague and admired his professionalism. But what she didn't know was that she would be the key to Cullen's arrest. While some hospitals did not go so far as to take illegal action against the nurse, others did, as did many of the victims' family members. As a result, Cullen was under investigation by the New Jersey State Police. The police spoke with Amy and reported that they suspected Cullen of being behind more than 20 patient murders. She did not believe them, as she thought Cullen was not capable of such a thing. But when she read the medical reports and complaints filed by previous hospitals, she was devastated, as the modus operandi described in the writings was the same as what she saw in her partner. Amy decided there and then to cooperate with the police, since the hospital, like so many others before it, would not. Without giving up her role as a friend, Amy began recording her conversations with Charles, even after he was fired from the hospital. The investigators decided it was time to confront him, so they had Amy show up at a local restaurant, and the investigation's plan was followed. Cullen did not testify at that time because he suspected that Amy was working with the police, so they had to change their plan. He was finally arrested on December the 12th, 2003. The investigation lasted more than 3 years, and in 2006, he was sentenced to 11 consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole until 2403. Cullen claimed responsibility for 29 murders, but experts estimate he may have been behind more than 400, which would make him the most prolific serial killer in history. Additionally, as one of the detectives said, hospitals covered up internal investigations so as not to lose the credibility of their services and gain a bad reputation. After all, healthcare in the United States was and is private, and a bad reputation costs money. There is no doubt that Charles Edmund Cullen was a disturbed person with dark thoughts and no respect for the lives of others. What other killer stories would you like us to bring to the channel? Let me know in the comments. This was Mr. Terror 777. See you next time.